visa season.
The more confident you become and the better you get at reading women and social situations in general, the more permission you're going to be able to give yourself to touch in increasingly intimate ways. What up, Casanova, and welcome to part 3 of a 3-part series on how to touch women in social settings, or how to be physically intimate with women in social settings. Now, in part 2, we looked at 3 lower risk ways in which you can touch women when you're out. And in this video, we're going to be looking at 5 higher risk ways in which you can be physically intimate with women when you're out. Now, in the first video, in part 1, I discussed the principles that you need to follow in order to navigate this area, this often described as a murky area by many men, navigate it with better ease to optimize your interactions with women and not to overstep any boundaries, not have her me too your ass. So if you haven't seen that video yet, go ahead and watch it before you get into this one. It'll help lay a really good foundation for you to work with. We'll give you kind of an overall structure that you can apply when you're out, and we'll just help you make a lot more sense of this video and of the different examples that we're going to be looking at. So before we get into it, let's do a quick refresher of the principles that I've outlined in part 1. Now, I'm not going to go in depth because you can just go ahead and watch that video, and I encourage you to do so. I just want to go through the list so we can keep these principles in mind as we look at the examples in this video. So the first principle is assume permission, or give yourself permission to touch as a general point. The second thing is your assumed confidence or comfort, the ease with which you carry yourself and with which you initiate touch in social settings really matters and has an impact on how your touching is perceived. So that means how fluid or flowing you are as opposed to choppy, and whether your touch is comfortably felt. It's not too limp, for example, neither too aggressive either, but it's comfortably felt, okay? So that again conveys a certain level of confidence. The next thing is the frame that you set in the interactions, or the vibe that you convey, also really matters in shaping the girl's perception of how you're touching and how you're interacting overall. Number 4, as a general principle, you should initiate touching sooner than later and not wait too long to do it, because the more you wait, the weirder it gets. 5 is gauge the appropriate level of touch or physical intimacy for the situation. And the last point is attempt and adjust, meaning attempt to initiate touch in any shape or form, but then always adjust if necessary. So always be looking at, is the girl comfortable? Do I have to dial it back? And remember, touching, when done right, is very powerful. It feels good. It's a great way of flirting and connecting with women. And most of all, it conveys that you are a socially attuned and confident man. And the more confident you become and the better you get at reading women and social situations in general, the more permission you're going to be able to give yourself to touch in increasingly intimate ways. Similarly, the more positive references that you gain with touching women in social settings, the more confidence you'll gain in the process in general. So with that in mind, let's look at these 3 lower risk ways in which you can touch women in social settings. Now note, you're going to notice a general gradual increase in the levels of physical intimacy as we move through the categories, as well as a gradual increase in the levels of assumed comfort and assumed permission, meaning how much permission and comfort you have to assume, or how much permission you have to give yourself in order to pull any of these physically intimate acts off without weirding the girl out.
Yeah, you look so Russian.
Why? Why?
That's a philosophical question. You got the Eastern European complexion.
Now, the next category is something I call corrective touching, and that essentially means that you are correcting or fixing something about her outfit, or maybe it's her hair, or her body language. So, for example, if her hair's kind of in the way, you can just kind of like put it out of the way or put it behind her ear. Or, you know, if her necklace is kind of crooked, you can fix that. Or, for example, sometimes girls will have their arms crossed and they're kind of like, their body language is closed off. I'll sometimes just kind of take their arms or take their hands and just like open it up and say, you got to open yourself up to the world, you know? What kind of body language is this? Is that your friend?
It is my friend, yeah.
Oh, did you
How's your Portuguese?
Not good, I must say. Not good at all.
There's your body language. You must open yourself up to the world.
I'm on my way home. I'm not into opening up myself. I'm into like going.
Behind you is gonna be disgusting.
Are you engaged?
I'm not engaged, but I am. Not.
That's very inconvenient for us. How are we?
I don't know how we're gonna fly to Brazil.
How are we gonna go to Brazil?
He's not gonna be very happy about it.
We'll send him a postcard.
Yo, quick announcement, my dude. Just want to briefly mention that over the last year, many guys have been asking me, how do you create chemistry with women? And this has sadly been exaggerated by the pandemic. That's right, I'm talking about that magic you see me create with the girls in my videos. So, I've decided to give away a super entertaining, uncut, infield bonus video showing exactly that. Just click on the link in the description below. By signing up, you're also joining the VIP list for our, wait for it, new course, Honest Chemistry, which will be released in the near future and will teach you everything to do with creating chemistry, from sexual tension to an amazing connection. This course has been more than a year in the making, and I'm really excited to release it. So be sure to click on the link in the description box or comment section below to get access to your bonus video and stay in the loop. All right, now let's get back into it. So here, the assumed level of permission is higher. You know, you're not only touching her, but you're correcting her. You know, you're telling her how it should be, and you're really assuming a certain level of comfort here. You know, if you're like moving her hair. So for this, she does need to be somewhat comfortable with you. She does need to be comfortable enough and also somewhat interested in you for this to be welcome. It's certainly more appropriate in higher stimulus environments or at some point on a date. Again, not something you do when you just approach a girl on the street or at the mall or bookstore, unless it's further along in the interaction and there's already a certain assumed level of comfort between the two of you. Having said that, her general level of physical and emotional arousal can still be on the lower end for this to be welcome. And lastly, the duration of your touch should still be on the shorter side. So if you're fixing your hair, don't just leave your hand there, you know? Or if you're, you know, fixing her body language, you know, and you've uncrossed her arms, don't just keep holding her hands, because that already moves into a lot more risque territory, which we're going to talk about later in the video.
Crazy idea. Adventure to the bar. We're gonna get a drink. Yeah.
This next category of touching or physical intimacy is something I like to call leading-oriented touching. It's essentially a form of touch you initiate when you want to lead the girl somewhere or move her somewhere. That can be extending your arm like this so that she hooks it so that you can walk somewhere, or just kind of taking her by the shoulders and being like, let's just shift over here for a second. Sometimes you might be talking, you know, in a crowded area. Maybe you're by the bar and you want to move like a couple of meters away, you know, or you want to like reposition her in some way. Well, you can just kind of like shift her or guide her along. Another thing you can do is, if you're trying to like move her somewhere, is you put your hand on her lower back or, you know, upper back sometimes, and you kind of guide her along somewhere. And the last form of this, the most risque form of this, is taking her hand and walking somewhere. Now here, the assumed level of permission is even higher, and she needs to not only be comfortable enough with you, but also reasonably interested in you.
Why are you so stressed about your friends? They'll text you when they're coming out, right?
I'm not stressed. No.
Come look at the fireplace with me. 2 seconds.
Her general level of physical and emotional arousal can still be on the lower end for this to be welcome, but her level of investment and time investment in the interaction does need to be higher, because most of the time girls are not going to agree to move somewhere with you or go somewhere with you if they're not very invested in the interaction. So if you just meet her like, and a couple of minutes in, you're like, oh, let's go somewhere, she's very unlikely to comply. And the duration here can be longer depending on what you're doing. If you're just kind of guiding her along, well, you know, your hand is not going to stay on her lower back for too long. But if you're moving her, you know, grabbing her hand and moving her to the other side of the bar, well, then you might be holding her hand for like, especially if it's a crowded area, you might be holding her hand for like 15 seconds, okay? And that's okay, because at this point you're assuming a certain level of comfort and permission. And this again is something that's going to be more appropriate for a higher stimulus environment, such as, you know, a bar or a club or maybe a music festival, or perhaps towards the middle or end of a date, which can happen during the day. At some point you could, you know, be walking hand in hand, depending on how much interest and comfort has already been built between you and the girl. You know, what kind of a frame is set between you and her. Like maybe you guys are crossing a busy street and you're like, here, quick, grab my hand if you want to live, or something. And then it kind of starts off as a joke, and then, you know, you guys are like running across the street. But then at some point, but then after that, you know, you can kind of gauge, does she still want to be holding your hand? And if so, you can continue to just walk hand in hand. And speaking of that, gauge her level of comfort. You know, if you're at a bar and you're grabbing her hand and you're trying to walk with her somewhere, gauge how she's responding. So if she's holding your hand in a very limp fashion, that might generally, not always, because some girls are very, you know, insecure and reserved and nervous, etc. But that could generally mean that she's not maybe yet too comfortable with you holding her hand. Okay, whereas if she grips it more firm, that could mean that she is very comfortable with you holding her hand. But if you want to play it safer, you know, you could always just do the arm hook. It's not as big of a deal. Now, what's good about the leading oriented touching is what it communicates and what it builds as far as attraction and comfort between you and the girl. If you're doing this, you're setting yourself up as a leader, okay, as the guy who's in control, you know, who's gonna keep her safe, right? That's what it kind of subcommunicates on a certain level. And that's going to be very well received by the girl, because women gravitate towards men that are leaders, that assume a certain level of control over the interaction and guide her to safety. It's crazy, like small things like, you know, when you're standing in, like I mentioned earlier, in that crowded area of the bar and you move her from there into a more conducive space for you and her to talk, that on a subconscious level is going to say a lot about you. The next category is something I like to call fun or adventurous touching. And some examples of that could be dancing that's not overly intimate, or grabbing her hand and just like skipping in the streets in some silly fashion, or picking her up and like twirling her, or just like running with her for a few seconds.
Have you ever skipped in the streets? Ready?
What do you mean?
Look at this, watch.
Halo?
You're adorable, like this.
And this stuff, if done right, can really accomplish a lot. It can really strengthen the connection you and the girl have. It can build a lot of sexual tension and attraction. It helps her associate you with this notion of fun, adventure, passion, which is especially great at night when her general arousal is already high and she wants, more stimulation, more fun. Especially something like picking her up and running with her for a few seconds. That stuff is really, really powerful. It communicates a lot on many levels, that you're a confident guy, a dominant guy. This can really turn girls on. I've had a girl tell me once that, we were out at a bar, and then, a bunch of us went home for like a little after party, and we ended up sleeping together. And in the morning, I remember her telling me that, I don't remember how this came up, but she said, when you picked me up and kind of ran with me, this was just outside the bar as we were leaving, I knew then and there that I wanted to sleep with you. It is, again, very powerful, communicates a lot. Having said that, you need to know how to do this in order to pull it off well. Because here, the assumed level of permission is a lot higher. Now, she doesn't need to be necessarily super comfortable with you, but does need to be somewhat interested enough with you, or at least think she is. And I'll explain that in a second. But more than that, the right frame needs to be set. If you set a certain frame right off the bat, there doesn't need to be that much comfort. It generally helps, of course, but it doesn't need to be, because if you can set a certain kind of like confident, fun, dominant, adventurous frame from the very beginning of the interaction, then you doing any of these things becomes congruent, okay? Becomes a natural extension of this frame you've set, of this vibe that you're creating.
We can't just so. People probably be like,
No, it was a spin.
These Canadian girls like
spin.
What is going on?
And now go back like this, and now roll in.
I'm not really like.
Roll in like this, and now. You are so light, and you smell like what's that stuff called?
And so this can actually, generally, like I said, more comfort is needed. More comfort is always good. But this can happen very quickly sometimes towards the end of a night out, at some kind of a venue or outside the venue, literally sometimes within minutes of meeting a girl, if the right frame is set. And the reason this can happen is because her general level of physical and emotional arousal at this point in the night is very high. She's been drinking, she's been dancing, she's been socializing, other guys have been hitting on her, so she's very aroused. So if you calibrate this well, you can, very quickly be skipping with her in the streets. However, this is not something you want to overdo like with anything else, maybe 5 to 10 seconds, although if you're dancing, it could be for longer. But even when you're dancing, you're not always dancing in very close proximity necessarily.
Song sounds like another song. California knows how to party.
You dance in close proximity for maybe 5 seconds, and then you take some space, you twirl her, maybe you dance on your own. Okay, so it creates a good healthy amount of pushing and pulling in the dynamic. And this keeps the sexual tension alive, because if you're just overdoing it too much, it starts to kill the sexual tension or the attraction, or just make her uncomfortable, especially if you just met her. The next category is something I like to call suggestive touching, essentially because it sub-communicates on a higher level, or a more obvious level, that you are interested in her. It communicates a higher level of intent. Okay, it suggests that I'm interested in you, I want us to be a thing, right? And this can be done very early on in the interaction. So, for example, when you shake her hand, you let it linger for 5-10 seconds. You just kind of keep holding it as you're continuing to talk with her. Something I told you not to do in the casual section, the casual touching section, right? That's where you don't want it to linger. But here, you're putting more on the line. Now, you could also hold her hand you know, once you're a lot more comfortable. It doesn't have to be in the initial stages. I'll kind of explain all this so that it's in perspective. Once you're a lot more comfortable, you could just like hold her hand and it feels a lot more natural because there's a lot more feedback. You've received a lot more feedback at this point that the girl is interested and comfortable. But you could also do it at the beginning of the interaction. Similarly, you can just grab both her hands as you make eye contact with her and just hold both her hands.
Excuse me, tall girl from the Flintstones.
Everyone's calling her Bam Bam tonight. I love it.
This is my son, and you look very lovable and tall.
Thank you.
Okay, so that again communicates a higher level of interest and intent. It's very flirtatious. It's almost like, hey, what's up? Like, I'm into you. So yeah, we're just chatting. What's going on? It can also communicate a certain level of, it can frame you as like the protector or the guy that's kind of looking after her, especially if you're reassuring her in some point, in some way, either seriously or quasi-seriously, like, hey, Melissa, hey, it's gonna be okay, all right? We'll get you more ice cream. Don't worry about it. You know, if her ice cream cone dropped or something. Regardless, it still paints you and her, it frames you and her as a thing. You could also continue holding her hand after you've done, you know, after you've led her. So like we talked about on the date, if you're like crossing the street and then afterwards you're just continuing to hold her hand, well, that's another example of you assuming this comfort and this interest and this permission. And if the girl's okay with it, it can be very powerful. Another example is you taking her hands and putting them around your waist, okay, or putting them around your neck and maybe bringing her in for a hug.
Right now.
Oh, what?
What are you up to right now?
We're all going back to my friend's house and we're getting pizza.
No, you guys should come after party with
Is
us.
it her birthday?
You guys should come after party with us. Don't part.
Oh, wow.
I will fight for you.
You will, eh?
Yeah.
Don't worry.
I will tell you a Russian poem.
A Russian?
Yeah. It's very,
Russian poem?
it's very vulgar, but
Oh my God.
it's very famous.
Okay, tell me.
So, you know, with all these things, although generally more comfort is needed, it can happen quickly. So, like with the last category, it can sometimes happen quickly towards the middle or end of the night, in the venue or outside of the venue. Again, sometimes within like minutes of meeting the girl, if again, the right frame is set or the right vibe is conveyed. If she doesn't really need to be overly comfortable with you, like she doesn't need to have spent a lot of time with you, but she does need to feel like she could be somewhat interested in you, you know, from those first few, for the first minute even of the interaction. If you, again, set this tone or this frame of like, I'm a cool, confident guy, I'm fun, you know, we're outside the bar now, this is just like a natural extension of this fun environment, and you can feel safe with me, then she's very likely to comply sometimes really quickly. But more comfort, I always advise a little bit more comfort is better. So spend, you know, up to like 5 minutes with the girl at night and then maybe try stuff like this to err on the side of caution and to not potentially sabotage the interaction.
You are so tall.
I know.
Are you married?
No.
Good. I'm not either. No. But listen, you should come hang with us.
Because mind you, while her general level of emotional, physical arousal is quite high, it's usually, again, in the middle, towards the middle or end of the night, and you can get away with more physically intimate displays of affection. You also don't want to come off as some kind of a drunk, obnoxious guy that she may have just been dealing with in the bar, okay? So more comfort is still better. Needless to say, this is definitely more appropriate for higher stimulus environments or outside of them or towards the middle or end of your date. This is not something that you should be doing when you first meet a girl during the day, you know, or even at the beginning of a night, sometimes when girls are not very emotionally and physically aroused, this can come off weird and it can be very unwelcome. So keep all this in mind. Make sure you calibrate. This can be very powerful if done right, and can sometimes either amplify the attraction and the comfort or just really spark it. You know, quickly initiate that flirtatious, fun tone to the interaction. And if you do a little too much too soon, just take a step back, okay? Adjust, remember. So if you hold her hand a little bit longer than she was comfortable with, she's gonna let you know. She's gonna like kind of pull away and you're gonna be like, okay. And it doesn't have to sabotage the interaction necessarily.
Vadim, V-A.
Vadim?
No, Vadim. You weren't even listening, you were just looking into my green eyes.
What's that guy doing? You looked at me like, and I was like, oh yeah, Vadim.
You are a character. My mother would not approve of this, kissing a stranger. A complete fucking stranger. I don't even fucking know you.
Say, a lot of people do that when they go out.
Can I just kidnap you to Brazil?
Hawaii maybe? Or Ibiza?
Why Ibiza? It's not even Ibiza season.
Last category is intimate touching, and that's because it assumes and communicates a high level of intimacy. So some examples are, you know, touching her thighs, her butt, her breasts, maybe massaging her in some sensual fashion. Although if you massage her in a more casual fashion, that could be more on the suggestive side. Okay, so it's not crazy intimate. Additionally, you can dance in a much more intimate way, like if you're grinding her, for example, and then simultaneously, you know, touching her breast, her thighs, her butt, etc., etc. And lastly, of course, kissing, whether it's on the lips or her neck, and maybe smelling her as you do that. Okay, so that's probably the most intimate form of touching, or the most pronounced form of physical intimacy that you can do in a social setting. And sure, there are guys that, you know, have fingered girls at concerts and stuff, but we're not gonna go there because those are anomalies. Now here, needless to say, the assumed level of permission and comfort is really high. So the girl does need to be quite comfortable with you and also interested in you for this to work. Moreover, her general level of emotional and physical arousal has to be high. So again, this is going to be more appropriate for higher stimulus environments, bars, clubs, concerts, etc. Whether you're meeting the girl for the first time or whether it's a date. And while she may welcome these forms of physical intimacy, that does not mean that you need to overdo them. In fact, you definitely should not overdo them. Let the duration still be in the 5 to 10 second range. And that's because if you do too much of this, too much kissing, too much grinding and feeling her up, let's say past the 10-second range, maybe 20-second range if you're dancing, that's going to slowly kill the sexual tension. All right, there's too much of a release of sexual tension, and could also just smother her and make her uncomfortable. So within reason, again, if you're dancing in some more intimate fashion, and you're kissing her, or you're touching her sensually in all these ways, take space every once in a while, right? Create that healthy push and pull dynamic, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So this again can be a very powerful way of amplifying the attraction and the connection between you and the girl if done right. Don't do it prematurely. Sure, when you were 18, and you might have gone to these, we used to have in Canada what we called all age parties. So if you were under the drinking age of 19, you would just get drunk beforehand, pay $20 cover to get in. They wouldn't serve you alcohol there. And at those parties, it was appropriate to just start grinding with a girl from behind her, and maybe she would take a cue from her friend of whether or not you're cute enough to dance with her or something, and she would grind with you without you having exchanged any words, and then maybe give you her number. Okay, so while it was appropriate in those kind of settings, and you can get away with it. In the normal adult world, you cannot just start grinding with women. Sure, in some rare cases when the woman is very highly emotionally aroused and in some fun mood on the dance floor, you know, sometimes you can quickly get quite intimate on the dance floor, but that's not going to last long, and those are anomalies. So again, err on the side of caution and calibrate well. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video as well as this series in general. Be sure to hit that like button as well as comment your thoughts, questions, concerns, anything about the topic below. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Also, don't forget to sign up for our Honest Chemistry VIP list so that you can grab your free in-field uncut bonus video. Link in the description below. Thanks again, and until next time.